Coming in at number 10 is The Spot. First appearing in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man number 98 in 1985, as a scientist working for the Kingpin, Dr. Jonathan Owen was assigned to produce the radiation levels of the Vigilante cloak to find a way to artificially mimic his powers. Working late one night, he succeeded, creating a solid black circular portal. The power used to create said portal caused a blackout, destabilizing it and prompting Owen to step into it and pass out. He awoke floating weightlessly in a dimension that was a place of half darkness and half light that contained a large number of portals, and using the original he slipped back through to the lab. The portals from the other dimension had adhered to his skin, covering him with black spots from head to toe that were portable space warps, and he decided to become muscle for the Kingpin using these powers. He faced Spider-Man and Black Cat, announcing himself as The Spot, causing Spider-Man to fall down laughing. But the potential of his powers not only defeated Spider-Man just once, but could potentially defeat many other heroes, making The Spot someone you may not want to underestimate. Luckily, he's popped up in the recent Carnage comic, but not for very long. Number 9. Moonstone. Carla Sofin was a not-so-moral psychiatrist who particularly enjoyed manipulating her patients into paranoia rather than actually helping them, so we're already off to a really good start here. This led her to be an assistant of the villain Dr. Faustus, and her manipulative skills only grew under his teachings. This allowed her to get time with Lloyd Bloch, the original Moonstone. She gave Lloyd hallucinogens and persuaded him into giving her the Moonstone and the Kree device that granted him his immense powers, which included 10-ton superhuman strength, super speed, stamina, durability, agility, reflexes, and flight, as well as, thanks to the Gravity Stone, the ability to control gravitational forces, enabling her to move and otherwise manipulate matter, to create force fields, to increase gravity around a target and crush it, to generate miniature black holes, and even to transport objects through dimensional rifts. Now, she's been featured in some big villain teams and moments, but I don't think she's ever really had her own time to shine as a solo villain in a real, tangible way. Number 8. Sin. Sin, aka Cynthia Schmidt, is the daughter of the Red Skull, and as such, she's often overshadowed by her pops. But for a little while, she was actually really cool with tons of potential. She was conceived with the intention of Red Skull gaining a male heir, but obviously, Cynthia is not male, and it almost meant her end if it wasn't for Susan Scarbo, who convinced the Skull to let her raise the child in his place. Eventually, Skull returned and used a machine to both age up Cynthia, but also to grant her superpowers. She was eventually captured and rehabilitated by S.H.I.E.L.D., but that was promptly undone by the henchman Crossbones, and the two of them went on the warpath, resulting in the demise of Steve Rogers' Captain America. Yes, Sin was instrumental in the legit fall of her father's greatest rival. But everything returns to the status quo, so Steve did eventually return and Sin was defeated. Despite all that happening though, she went on to gain control of a mystical Asgardian hammer that transformed her into the incredibly powerful Scotty, which was like the main inciting incident for the Fear Itself storyline. She's a really cool villain, and one that needs more time in the limelight. I almost prefer her to her father, as much of a sin as that is to say, no pun intended. She just feels even more ruthless and convincing. I want more Sin. It's a weird thing to say. Number 7. Killer Moth. Killer Moth, unlike a lot of the characters on this list, isn't really that powerful. But that's not what makes them underrated and in need of more attention. Killer Moth is just fun. Drury Walker first appeared all the way back in Batman number 63 from February 1951, and his whole shtick is just goofy. While other characters have taken their inspiration from having similar backstories to the Batman, the Killer Moth wanted to be the criminal's version of Batman, so he got himself a moth signal and a mothmobile and the name of Killer Moth. Scary. He even set up a false identity as millionaire philanthropist Cameron Van Cleer. In this form, he became friends with Bruce Wayne, which is interesting. I doubt he knew about Bruce's hobby of Bat cosplay, but meanwhile, he promoted himself to Gotham's criminals using his identity as Killer Moth, giving them each an infrared moth signal to call him to their aid. He didn't really fight for them. Instead, he kind of became the distraction for the authorities so that the real criminals could get away. Do you see why he didn't really become so popular? It's just so hilarious, and although his character has evolved a bit since then, no one has really taken him that seriously, so just like Kite Man, he kinda needs his time to just shine and blossom like a flower.
At number 6 is Dr. Sivana. When it comes to the DC Universe's Rogues Gallery, there are some villains that get all the spotlight while others get basically none. Take Dr. Sivana, for instance. He is to Shazam what Lex Luthor is to Superman. Just as evil and brainy as Lex Luthor, but without the fame, riz, or notoriety. But when it comes to mad scientists in comics, this guy is the OG. He's got the super incredible knack for scheming up and executing diabolical plans with brain power alone. But here's the thing, not many of his recent comics give him the chance to truly shine. That is, until the Multiversity Thunderworld Adventures comic. So in this epic scene, Sivana and his multiverse clones gang up and storm the Rock of Eternity. Now, the Rock of Eternity isn't your average hangout. It's a spot where the big shot wizard hangs out. And Sivana pulls a bold move and actually manages to lock up the wizard. Not stopping there, he decks out his own offspring with the powers similar to Shazam's crew, making it a superhero headache to stop him. I mean, just think about it, imprisoning a magical heavyweight and then turning your spawn into superpowered versions of themselves? Some next level supervillain stuff right there. So even if Dr. Sivana isn't grabbing headlines, don't underestimate the brilliance of this wicked mind in the DC baddie lineup. At number 5 is Vandal Savage. He's like a solid B-list villain in the DC world. Like, he's been around, tangled with superheroes, but somehow hasn't hit the big leagues yet. But don't write him off just yet. Check out his 853rd century version of himself in this storyline called DC 1 Million. Savage really amps up his game, buddying up with Solaris, the Tyrant's son, aiming to take down the Justice League of America across time and space. And guess what Savage actually pulled off? He did this crazy thing where he swapped the future team with the present one, almost spelling doom for both sides playing with time like that. But ultimately, Savage's pride got the better of him. In a classic karma strike, he got zapped back to a nuclear attack set off in the past, which, that's tough. At number 4 is Mordru. Mordru, the Sorcerer Supreme equivalent in DC's villain catalog, is a heavyweight in the magical corner of the DC universe. Like, his home planet is literally known as Sorcerer's World, the universal center of all magic, so you could guess he's pretty magical. He didn't just pop up once, he made a grand entrance by throwing down with the Legion of Superheroes way off in the future. Sneaky as they come, he even managed to sneak back into the past without anybody batting an eye. Now, when he crossed paths with the Justice Society of America, things went from zero to chaos in a flash. The heroes managed to trap him in a Dr. Fate amulet, thinking that they'd sorted it all out, but that was all according to Mordru's big plan. He flipped the script, snagged the power of Fate, and teamed up with Eclipso and Obsidian. They took over Earth, casting the world into a near-constant eclipse. At number 3 is Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze, initially known as Dr. Victor Fries, or Mr. Zero, started off as a typical icy antagonist in the world of comic books. But let me tell you, his story took a wild turn in 1992 with that Batman the Animated Series episode called Heart of Ice. Before that, he was just a goofy, run-of-the-mill baddie chilling in the background of Batman's world. But then, something magical happened. The animated series reimagined Mr. Freeze, giving him depth we've never seen before. His super awesome deep voice that was really haunting and really made you feel his pain. Suddenly Freeze wasn't just freezing Gotham, he was a guy wrecked by sadness and revenge. The core of his story revolved around his wife Nora. Freeze was desperately trying to save her from a terminal illness, but corporate greed and tragic lab accident with cryogenic stuff turned him into an icy guy who can't survive outside of his suit. But then things got really icy in a bad way. In the live-action movie called Batman and Robin, remember Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze? Yeah, that one's with all the cold puns like chill out and nice to meet you. Yeah, it was super goofy that turned Freeze into a walking joke. Well, unfortunately, that's what many folks still remember him as to this day. But in the comics, Freeze stayed close to the series version from the animated series until New 52 shook things up. Scott Snyder took Freeze in a different direction, making Freeze way less sympathetic by altering his reality. Suddenly, Nora wasn't his wife anymore, just some girl with a made-up illness. And the guy who pulled the plug on his research, surprise, surprise, it was none other than Bruce Wayne himself, which was a twist that made everybody involved look a lot less likable. So while some chop him up to just a dude with a freeze ray, he's actually way cooler than that. Haha. At number 2 is Zoom. Zoom, aka Hunter Zolomon, was like a rival to Wally West, much like how Reverse Flash, aka Eobard Thawne, is the rival to Barry Allen. In fact, a lot of the same themes from the Barry Allen story are reintroduced here. Solomon used to be a regular FBI guy, but things took a wild turn when he tried to use the cosmic treadmill to fix up the past, which granted him these epic time-traveling powers. Now, Solomon had this whole beef with Wally West, the fastest Flash, mind you. He wanted Wally to help him out with his time travel troubles, but when Wally West said no, things went haywire. Solomon went all in, donning the Reverse Flash-style threads and took on the name Zoom, completely inspired by Eobard's Professor Zoom. Zoom's deal was trying to wreck everything the Flash ever stood for through deception and murder, which twistedly culminated in Zoom's plan to make West a better hero by causing him a life full of tragedies. Now what's mind-blowing is that Zoom managed to outspeed Wally West, who's the fastest Flash among Flashes. Imagine beating the fastest guy around, like that's no small feat. To take Zoom down, Wally had to dig deep and pull out all the stops, but despite the incredible feat, Zoom just doesn't quite get the recognition he deserves. Barry Allen's return and the rise of the Reverse Flash kinda stole Zoom's thunder, even though Zoom managed to outpace the top tier Flash, and that's no small accomplishment. And at number 1 is Hush. Meet Hush, also known as Thomas Elliot. This dude is not your average villain. He's not a Joker or Penguin per se, but he's got the cunning, the smarts, and he's a worthy adversary of the Caped Crusader, to say the least. Thomas Elliot, a childhood buddy of Bruce Wayne, grows up to become this hotshot neurosurgeon. But behind that successful facade lies a guy who blames Bruce's dad, Thomas Wayne, for messing up his life by saving his mom. That grudge transforms him into Hush, a master manipulator with a bone to pick with Batman. Now what's fascinating is how he plays the long game, standing out with his intricate and calculated strategies to take down Batman. What's even more impressive is the fact that he managed to outsmart the Dark Knight himself, which is not an easy task. Now what's cool about Hush is that he's not just the run-of-the-mill villain. I mean, sure, he's got dual pew-pews, which is pretty impressive, and he drops quotes from Aristotle, adding to this whole sophisticated vibe to his character, but what's really fascinating is how he challenges Batman on an intellectual level. He's not just there to beat him up, he wants to outwit him, which, believe it or not, is a tall order. Now the thing is, even though he's not as famous as some other Gotham villains, Hush managed to give Batman a run for his money, which is a super big deal. Like, imagine going toe-to-toe with the smartest kid in class and almost acing the test. That's Hush for you. He's underrated but seriously important.
Number 10, Kang the Conqueror. While the future of Kang in the MCU is extremely uncertain, with Jonathan Majors being removed from future projects, the fact remains that in the comics, Kang is an extremely underappreciated villain. This is likely because not as many modern comics fans know how deadly Kang can be. If you are more a fan of the MCU, or if you are more of a modern day comic book collector and reader, you might have missed out on some of Kang's most epic stories and most deadly moves when it comes to him facing the Avengers. Although I will say that comics have been hinting at his power in recent years, if you know where to look. Kang is typically an Avengers villain. While he might look ridiculous on paper, many of us comic book fans know to respect him, as Kang is a master of time who has defeated an insane number of Avengers across the multiverse. I'm not as worried for the character's future in the MCU, because the other cool thing about Kang is that he's a time traveler, and as a result, he has many different looks and identities through the years. So it's possible that he could actually be anyone hiding in disguise, laying in wait for the right moment to reveal himself and strike. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like button. Number 9, the Lizard. The Lizard is a villain who often gets overlooked when it comes to Spider-Man fans. Why is this? Because not many people know just how dark and deadly the Lizard can be, and perhaps because the Lizard's alter ego, Curt Connors, is known for being a good man and a scientist. But that doesn't mean there isn't darkness lurking beneath the surface, even with as well-intentioned a man as Connors. And even without any potential darkness within Connors, the Lizard should be dark enough to persuade readers to be intimidated by him and respect him. You also have to think of how terrifying it must be for Connors' consciousness to exist within the Lizard when the creature is completely unleashed and fully in control. It's a complete lack of control in a way that is probably super terrifying for Curt. Number 8, Hunter in the Darkness. The Hunter in the Darkness is an interesting character, and one that honestly we do not talk enough about on Top 10 Nerd. nerd, and also super complex to be honest. Villain, sometimes a bit of an anti-hero or an ally to heroes. While Wolverine did once free the werewolf-like being from a trap years ago, the Hunter still remained an adversary of Wolverine. It has been implied in the comics that there is a sense of camaraderie between the two at times. When we first met the Hunter in Darkness, it was made to seem like, and in fact some characters in the issue did think, that the Hunter was actually a more feral version of Logan. Number 7. Taskmaster. Everyone knows that Anthony Masters is insane when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. He has photographic reflexes, which allow him to learn any fight move or style just by observing or battling against someone, which makes him pretty hard to beat if you don't have some kind of crazy superpower set. Taskmaster might not be on anyone's A-list, but he sure has fought a ton of well-loved superheroes, including Moon Knight. Moon Knight himself doesn't have any crazy superpowers, but he does have a Batman-like ability to strike fear into the hearts of almost all of his opponents, no matter how skilled they are, which was really the only thing that made it possible for him to defeat Tony here.
Number 6. Lifeform. Lifeform is weird, I'll give you that, but he deserves so much more attention. The son of a right-wing libertarian, George Prufrock was trained by his father to prepare him for the world. Now, although he wanted to be an actor, his father's training saw George convinced to become a scientist instead, eventually landing a role at Advanced Idea Mechanics. Unfortunately, this meant George was exposed to the pro-gamma virus. This virus mutated George into this grotesque monster with superhuman strength, durability, a healing factor, and he can survive in water and the vacuum of space. But he's literally a mutated monster. Now, as Lifeform, he ended up coming face to face with the Punisher, but also sending Frank running away in fear because his weapons had no effect on Lifeform. Eventually, Frank defeated Lifeform, pushing him into a river, but George came back. Now, with two personalities, one his normal peaceful self and the other being the monster. George now came into conflict with Daredevil, but this time he was more of a confused monster, and eventually, in an altercation with the police, his heart began beating so fast that he collapsed and then dissolved into a puddle. When he reformed, this time he was put into battle against the Hulk by the alien Mercy, who also turned him back into an actual man again. But this wouldn't last, as he remutated and attacked an entire hospital. Eventually, this led to the Silver Surfer taking George to a dead planet destroyed by Galactus and just leaving him there, as he couldn't bring himself to put an end to this dual personality monstrosity. And that's the last we ever saw of Lifeform, and I need to know more. Number 5. Wrath. A young, successful, and secretly entirely evil CEO, Wrath is capable of being both Batman and Bruce Wayne's #1 nemesis and antithesis, and yet almost no one cares about him or even knows about him. Wrath first appeared back in 1984 as basically an anti-Batman, and while that may sound like lazy writing and may make you think he won't be popular, he did it before the major villain Prometheus even ever conceived of the idea. Wrath's parents were two burglars who were accidentally taken from this plane of existence by a young police officer who stumbled on them and thought they were robbing their own house. As you can imagine, this is quite the villain backstory to turn a young Wrath completely against law enforcement. He then decided his whole existence to go against them. Wrath even ended up training a young ward of his own named Elliot Caldwell, who you might have guessed became his version of Robin. Caldwell eventually takes on the role of Wrath himself, filling in his mentor's shoes, and he remained as the villain after the New 52 reboot. And yet, Wrath is nowhere to be seen, and you basically never hear from him. Number 4. Spymaster. While other underrated villains end up going into the direction of being ridiculous or really boring, Ted Calloway, also known as Spymaster, is just plain awesome. Which makes me wonder why the hell he doesn't really get more attention. He has been a thorn in the side of Tony Stark Iron Man for quite a while, and a big thorn at that, breaking into Stark Tower multiple times. In one arc, he was the one who put together a team of other underutilized Iron Man villains and broke into Stark Tower, stealing some of Stark's tech. He was even able to steal tech for Justin Hammer, which was the spark for the awesome Armor Wars storyline. He has eluded capture multiple times and even let the world believe he was passed away while he continued to operate in the shadows. Despite first appearing in 1971, he's just always remained relatively unknown to the common audience member, and I think that's gotta change. Number 3. Manchester Black. What's so funny about Truth, Justice, and the American Way is an incredibly good comic book that sees the arrival of a group of anti-heroes called the Elite that fight crime but in an incredibly brutal way. They cause massive accidents and cause the passing of a lot of innocents while still ultimately saving the day. They take the easy road to fighting crime, and this flies directly in the face of the moralities of one little hero called Superman. The leader of this band of villainous heroes goes by the name Manchester Black, and he has access to an incredible incredible level of telekinesis and telepathy. He was able to punch a hole in mountains, but could also pinch the blood vessels in Superman's brain in order to give the hero the equivalent of a stroke. And with his telepathy, he could combat Martian Manhunter, control a group of elite superheroes, and could manipulate the mind of Superman. He is incredibly capable. But in the story he premiered in, he was defeated rather quickly when Superman partially lobotomized him. And even though he got his powers back and has caused a little trouble here and there, I feel as though this villain should have way more time in front of the spotlight. Number 2, Cersei. Cersei is a bit of a tough pick. On one hand, she isn't underrated at all. She's an incredibly powerful, evil magic wielder, and she could very easily serve as the complete antithesis to Wonder Woman. But on the other hand, she just kinda doesn't. Cersei is a legendary sorceress from Greek mythology. She's immortal and undying, is a centuries-old enchantress with goddess-level powers. She's been on some of the biggest evil teams, but yet she just kind of falls short on most occasions. She was even one of the witch-marked, and I think that's been my favorite of her shows, but even then, she is not the big bad, when I believe that Cersei has the potential to be a whole Justice League level threat all by her lonesome if she was just given the right story. I'm not hugely knowledgeable on her, I'll admit that, so if I'm missing a story where she is given this attention, please let me know in the comments down below. And finally, in at number 1 is Rune, Ultraverse's cosmic energy vampire who fought Conan, Thor, Venom, and Silver Surfer. He's owned by Marvel and Disney, but he cannot be used without permission of the creator, Barry Windsor Smith, so he's currently pretty dormant. Now, Rune began his life as an anthropomorphic-like alien in the Ultraverse before he encountered the magical Starstones. The effects of the Starstones did more than grant him everlasting life. They damned him to live in a horrific and grotesque body, as well as instilling him with a craving for blood and the life force of others that the Starstones required in order to give him power. Following the events of Godwheel, which affected the little-known Ultraverse alongside the 616 universe in Marvel Comics, Thor opened a portal to leave, but Rune jumps into it too at the last second and is transported along with Thor back to Marvel Earth 616. Now, after exiting the portal, Rune encounters and almost takes the life of Powder Keg by drinking his blood, but doing so gives Rune more power and results in him sensing the Infinity Gems, which is then when he went on a one-minded mission to collect them all, which he actually does before they overpower him and the Soul Stone turns him into a shriveled up husk.
Number 10, Mr. Fear. Zoltan Drago was the owner of a failing wax museum who was trying to create a chemical that would bring his wax sculptures to life so that he could create his own private army. Unfortunately for him, his plan to have an army of wax celebrities would not come to pass because, you know, that's not how chemistry works. However, in his attempts, he did inadvertently manage to create a chemical that could be used to fill any foe with indescribable fear. So he said, meh, close enough, and he developed a gas gun that could shoot this formula, and he became Mr. Fear, presumably because Scarecrow was taken. He fought Daredevil a few times, making Matt have to live up to the moniker of the Man Without Fear. He was later killed by the villain Samuel Saxon, who took up the Mr. Fear mantle before he died and became the robotic villain Machinesmith. When this happened, Matt Murdock's rival from law school, Larry Cranston, became the third and current Mr. Fear. Number 9, the Jester. It's difficult to break into acting. It's a tough industry, as Jonathan Powers discovered. After years of struggling, the egotistical actor was cast in a production of Cyrano de Bergerac, but his performance was not well received, and he was booed by audience members, panned by critics, and fired after the show's opening night. After this, he decided to learn as many skills as possible to make himself a more versatile and hireable performer, taking up bodybuilding, gymnastics, and fencing, just to name a few skills. Perhaps due to his mammoth ego, he refused to take any actual acting lessons, and as a result could only find work on a children's show where he was constantly having pies thrown in his face. As all actors do, he eventually went insane, and with the help of the Tinkerer became the supervillain known as the Jester. He has gone on several bizarre crime sprees, such as when he used fake newscasts to convince people that JFK was alive and that the Vietnam War never occurred, which was probably written to be a goofy scheme back in the 70s, but in today's climate is just sad because it would probably work. He has tangled with Daredevil several times over the years, although he did retire for a time after successfully impersonating a famous actor named Benedict LaForge and performing the role of Cyrano on TV in Daredevil number 218. He actually did very well with the part, and this seemed to give him some much needed closure, although he did eventually return to a life of crime. Number 8, the Matador. Not to be confused with the Matador who fought Captain America back in the 1940s, Manuel Eloganto was was introduced in one of Daredevil's earliest adventures, back when the hero was still garbed in his original yellow and red costume. His origin is very clearly laid out in a newspaper Matt reads in Daredevil number 5, so I'm just gonna pull a quote directly from there. For years, Eleganto was the most famous, most controversial bullfighter in all of Spain. His mastery of the bulls was unquestioned, but his cruelty and his brutality towards the bulls made the crowds hate him. In fact, in his last public appearance, the audience actually was heard to cheer for the bull. This so infuriated the temperamental Matador that he turned to hurl an epithet back at the cheering crowd. It goes on for a bit, but basically what happened is he got gored by the bull and blamed humanity, and decided to become a Matador-themed criminal. And by that I mean he would do stuff like stand in the street and throw his red cape at an armored truck's windshield, causing it to crash. Not exactly one of Daredevil's greatest threats. Number 7. Stilt-Man. First appearing in Daredevil number 8, Stilt-Man was a scientist named Wilbur Day who stole the plans for a hydraulic ram device in order to create telescopic metal legs, which allowed him to tower above the people of New York as Stilt-Man. He used the power of being tall to attack the scientist, Carl Caxton, multiple times in hopes of stealing the scientist's shrink ray. On one of those occasions, he hoped to use the device to shrink the Golden Gate Bridge, but was defeated by Daredevil and Black Widow. Surprisingly, the ability to be tall has not made Stilt-Man an effective supervillain, and he has been defeated with relative ease by multiple heroes in the Marvel Universe.
Number 6. Chameleon. Chameleon is definitely a hero who deserves more love and more respect, or at least more disdain if you love to hate the greatest villains. He was the first villain that Spider-Man ever faced in his own series. A lot of people don't think of shapeshifters or masters of disguise first when it comes to power levels, but the reality is someone who is really good at disguising themselves as other people can be one of the most deadly and unstoppable villains around. Look at what Mystique managed to do only a few years ago in X-Men's Inferno, or Chameleon in Devil's Reign. Not only is Chameleon great at creating chaos and hurting others by disguising himself as other people, but he also is pretty good at hatching his own plans as well. Number 5. Mystique. Mystique is someone who isn't particularly, or at least outwardly, powerful when it comes to what she's capable of and her power set, and for this reason many people have taken to underestimating her abilities. Here's why I would advise against that. 2021's Inferno issue number 4. In the Inferno series, it's revealed that while Mystique tried to play by Krakoa's rules, when she learned she wasn't going to get what she wanted from Magneto and Professor X, no matter what she did in the name of the Mutant Nation, she decided to take matters into her own hands, as Mystique so often does. I mean, that's why we love her, right? Disguising herself as many different people, she was able to easily ensure that Destiny was in fact resurrected, against the wishes of the heads of the Quiet Council. She also put into motion plans to make sure that Destiny would garner a spot on the Quiet Council, and then she was almost successful in enacting a revenge, on Moira X for keeping her love, Destiny, from her for so long. Mystique here proves that while her power set may have become OP over the years, it's still really her mind and her sense of cunning that makes her honestly so dangerous. Number 4. Mysterio. Another villain that often gets dismissed when it comes to Spider-Man's rogues gallery is Mysterio. Mysterio is a villain that is all smoke and mirrors and illusions, which makes a lot of folks consider him to be a not so real threat. Still, in the cinematic take on the character, we saw Mysterio almost completely fool the entire world. Or well, even being defeated, he still kind of did. His plan here was to convince everyone he was a hero and win them over to his side, and even despite seemingly dying, I'm still not convinced, he actually still managed to succeed somewhat. In the Old Man Logan universe, Mysterio is also the one behind defeating all of the X-Men by tricking Wolverine into thinking all of his friends were really supervillains, thereby getting him to kill the entire X-Men team and school himself. Yikes. Number 3. Destiny. Destiny is one of those villains that is severely underrated. I mean, most people don't even think of her when they think about Marvel villains. Even when they think about X-Men villains, she doesn't happen to be one of the folks that first comes to your mind. And yet she is one of the most powerful out there, despite being very squishy, honestly. Even dead, she is somewhat of a threat in the comics due to her previously recorded premonitions. You see, Destiny is the lover of Mystique, and her mutant power is that she can see into the future. The more likely a future becomes, the more she can see that future, and her visions have often been known to be quite accurate. We don't have a lot of characters who can see into the future, and most of them tend to be on the hero side of things that do have that power, so it's interesting to see a villain with such rarely seen powers, but especially when you consider, her alignment. as a villain. Number 2, Madelyne Pryor. Of course, I have to include the Goblin Queen. You guys know how much I love her. Anytime I do a list like this, she's one of the first people that comes to my mind, and we gotta talk about her. Madelyne Pryor is a woman who seems to easily be forgotten and shelved, which is surprising considering how great of a threat she posed in the original Inferno story. Currently in the comics, Madelyne Pryor is making a comeback, even going on to lead her own X-Men team, nicknamed the Dark X-Men editorially. Madelyne Pryor has threatened the entire world with her dark rituals and demon pacts before, and though often forgotten, she really shouldn't be, considering just how dangerous and how powerful she is. Number 1, the Maker. The Maker is the alternate version of Reed Richards. I've always felt that Richards actually might make a better villain than a hero, and the Maker seems to have been this thought made manifest, living proof of it being so. The Maker initially started out as a hero, leader of the team known as the Fantastic Four. However, in the Ultimate Universe where he hails from, the original Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, his and Sue's future of marital bliss was not as guaranteed. And in fact, after the tragedy of Ultimatum and Sue Storm turning down his marriage proposal, Richards got a different perspective on life, which inevitably resulted in him becoming a villain. In this universe, Reed had a rough childhood, and part of where his villainy started was in turning on his own family. A family that had honestly mistreated him for years. Yeah, in this reality, Reed commits patricide and matricide to get back at his parents. And that's just the beginning of his story as a villain. Extremely counter to his Earth 616 alternate.
But in at number 10 is Microwave Man. Punch-proof, bulletproof, and capture-proof. That's him, the Microwave Man. Louis Paget has the honor of being the first actually superpowered villain to ever appear in DC Comics. Louis gained microwave-based abilities through some scientific experimentation, allowing him to absorb microwaves and alter them, which he used to rob banks. His experiments attracted the attention of aliens though, who invited him to see the galaxy with them, and he accepted. Now an old man, they finally brought him back to Earth so he could pass away on his home planet. However, when he discovers the existence of Superman and that his microwave powers have increased thanks to how much more microwaves are used in the present time, he asks the aliens to make him young again so he can experience a fight with Superman, even though he knows that the strain of it will kill him. They agree. And so during the fight, Superman comes up with a way to defeat him, but the aliens tell Superman about how Louis will pass away afterwards, so Superman lets him win. Number 9, Toyman. Toyman is a little less obscure as he is a long-lasting character. He's just so freaky and weird, and I wanted to talk about him, so here we are. Winslow Schott was a very talented toy maker. He was bullied as a kid, and as an adult, a businessman who owned an arms manufacturer tried to convince Winslow to sell his toy designs in order to be turned into weapons, which was absolutely not cool with Winslow. Unfortunately, the passing of his android toy wife, Mary, forced his hand and he had to sell out. He took revenge on the businessman though with an exploding teddy bear, and thus the Toyman was born. He can go from a goofy mad scientist to a psychologically disturbed tragic figure in his stories. The worst part is every time he attempts to salvage his reputation and do something good, something tragic usually drives him further into darkness. Number 8, Manchester Black. Technically, Manchester Black is supposed to be an anti-hero, apparently, but like almost everything he's done feels like a villain kind of thing to me, I don't know. Manchester Black is actually a pretty strong telepath and telekinetic, and he did kind of horrible things with this power. Like on New Earth, he ended up revealing Superman's secret identity to all of the villains and even made Superman think that Black had taken the life of Lois Lane in an attempt to make Superman break his oath and kill Black, which didn't work. On Prime Earth, he discovered Superman's secret identity, made some aliens become the Kent's neighbors in Hamilton County, captured Superboy and nullified his powers for a while, forced him to watch images of Lois and Clark fighting the Elite and suffering, and then he returned his powers and used John against his father, Superman. How have I never heard of this guy before? I don't know. Number 7, Master Jailer. Master Jailer became a character in a time when DC was struggling to find stories for the Man of Steel. It's kind of hard when you have a character that can pretty much do anything he wants to. So for Carl Draper, he made a fortune creating foolproof containment units for maximum security prisons. He started to become a villain, however, when he decided to create a containment unit for the strongest superhero on Earth, Superman. Didn't didn't really go too well for him though. But his real power emerged when, thanks to that Manchester Black guy, Master Jailer learned Superman's true identity. In the newer continuity, this guy only lasted a real-world month after he joined the Suicide Squad and used his abilities to contain an explosion, which ended his life.
Number 6. Bushwacker. Although he was originally a Catholic priest, Carl Burbank renounced his vows upon the death of several of his young parishioners. In what may just be the most extreme career pivot in history, he joined the CIA, where he got a cybernetic arm that he is able to transform into a gun. After leaving the CIA, he became a freelance assassin who specialized in killing his targets in artistic and aesthetically pleasing ways. He has fought against Daredevil and other heroes such as Wolverine and the Punisher, and has worked for a variety of employers including the Kingpin, the Hood, and the US Hulk operations. He's been a consistent presence in the Marvel Universe over the years, but is rarely the main villain, usually working as a pawn in a more prolific villain's schemes. Number 5. Iari. During Mark Waid's excellent run on Daredevil, Bullseye was confined to an iron lung after being defeated by Daredevil. He had Lady Bullseye hire a new threat named Iari to kill his rival. Bullseye had Iari experimented on with the same toxic waste that gave Matt his abilities and had him trained to be just as effective a fighter as Matt. In their first encounter, Iari lured Matt to a warehouse and confronted him dressed in Batlin Jack Murdoch's old robe and a costume modeled after Matt's original yellow and red number. They fought to a standstill, and Matt tried to negate Ikari's radar sense by turning on the building's sprinkler system, only to learn that although he had radar sense, he was not blind. He could have killed Matt, but he decided to let Matt live in fear of his eventual death at his hands. The two fighters got their rematch when Iari was hired by the Kingpin to fight Murdoch to the death. Kingpin had Matt's loved ones kidnapped and informed Daredevil that if he won the fight, he would have one of his loved ones executed. Daredevil and Iari fought for hours until the Shroud intervened and seemingly killed the assassin. The body disappeared soon after, but his severed head was later seen as a trophy in Kraven the Hunter's island hideout in Captain America number 697. Number 4. Blackwing. The son of the crime boss Silvermane, Joseph Manfredi learned how to train and control bats to do his bidding. This brought him to the attention of the villain Ringmaster, who offered Joe a position in his circus of crime. Joe accepted and created a very familiar looking suit that gave him limited flight abilities, and he began committing crimes with his trained mutant bats. Because the more obvious name had already been taken, he started calling himself Blackwing. The circus of crime came into conflict with Daredevil, who defeated them, capturing everyone but Blackwing, who managed to escape. He tangled with Daredevil a couple more times and also fought other heroes such as Black Widow, Captain America, and the Falcon before giving up the bat theme and becoming a regular crime boss like his father. Probably for the best, as his decision to straight up dress as Batman was a lawsuit waiting to happen. Number 3. Manbull. Bill Torrens was a common criminal working for the evil android Mr. Klein with his partner, Itch. He was tasked with kidnapping people so they could be used in Klein's experiments. When Daredevil intervened, Bill was forced by his employer to be a test subject. The experiment transformed him into a super-sized bull man named Manbull. Daredevil defeated him and he reverted to his human self, being sent to prison for his crimes. Itch later smuggled him in a revised formula which permanently transformed him into the Manbull and allowed him to escape from prison. He has teamed up with other Daredevil enemies such as the Owl and, ironically, the Matador, and has also fought heroes such as the Hulk and Scarlet Witch, but isn't a particularly well-known Marvel villain. He did, however, recently make the jump to live action when he appeared as a member of the Abominations group therapy session in the She-Hulk TV show. Number 2. Robert Goldman. Robert Goldman was a classmate of Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson at Columbia Law when they were all training to be lawyers. He would go on to become the assistant district attorney and was the lawyer who arranged the deal which allowed Daredevil to keep his secret identity in exchange for a guilty plea when he was on trial for murder. It was later revealed that he is actually Matt's guardian angel who has been manipulating the horrible events of Matt's life in order to make him a better hero. He has claimed responsibility for the death of Elektra's father, causing Matt's stint in prison and influencing Elektra's death at the hands of Bullseye. He also influenced and helped the FBI agent who revealed Matt's identity back in the Bendis run, sent Typhoid Mary to the Kingpin, and caused a train explosion that almost caused the death of Matt's girlfriend, Kirsten McDuffie. This is a very recent development in the Daredevil canon, so we have yet to see how valid these claims are, or how much of an impact this villain will leave with readers, but their confrontation has certainly left the Man Without Fear shaken to his core. Number 1. Death's Head. The father of longtime Daredevil love interest Karen Page, Paxton Page was a famous scientist who created a cobalt bomb. When he refused to sell the bomb to anyone, including the US government, he was called a traitor and became a recluse, living with his wife Penelope out in their creepy old mansion. He continued to experiment with the radiation radiation and developed powers which allowed him to manipulate cobalt radiation, being able to form and throw fireballs at his enemies. He was driven mad and began dressing as a figure from Karen's childhood nightmares, wrapping himself in bandages and wearing a skull-like mask. He developed a formula which turned everything but the bones on his horse invisible and began haunting the grounds of his mansion like a Scooby-Doo villain. While fighting Daredevil in his secret laboratory, a vat of molten cobalt tipped over and almost killed his daughter. He regained his senses for a moment and pushed Karen out of the way, getting caught in the spill himself and killed. He was only featured in 2 issues of the comics, Daredevil Volume 1 issues 56 and 57, but given how things ended for his daughter, a story featuring him returning for revenge on Daredevil could be a lot of fun.
Number 10. Donald Blake. Donald Blake may be one of the characters fans of Thor in the comic are most familiar with of those on our list. He has made more appearances than others for sure, but he is better known in the comics as a version of Thor and later as his ally as opposed to his enemy. Donald Blake sort of used to be Thor, but then he became his own separate entity, but then he still helped Thor. However, in recent years, Donald Blake has become the enemy of Thor after he was locked away in a fantasy realm. Having learned the truth of his false existence there, he called to Thor for help, but when Thor never answered, Blake began to unravel, believing that Thor had abandoned him. He started to strike out first at those who he could, the fake beings living inside the dream reality with him. But once free from reality and back in the real world, Blake came after as many Thors as he possibly could as he sought revenge. Blake vowed to destroy all who did or had carried the mantle of Thor. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love obscure Thor villains, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button on this video. Thumbs up. Number 9. King Laufey. Laufey is known for being the leader of the Giants of Jotunheim. In fact, he is technically Loki's biological father, with his wife Farbauti being Loki's birth mother. Laufey hasn't made too many appearances, and this could be because although he is a giant and you'd think he would be a massive threat as the king of all the Giants of Jotunheim, he actually doesn't seem to be that tough. Multiple times Laufey has been defeated and killed, and multiple times he's returned only to be defeated again. Thor has even prevented Laufey from being resurrected in the past as well. So while he is a fearsome foe to behold with a lot of sway and loyal followers, he probably hasn't made too many appearances because, well, half the time he's usually busy being dead. In fact, I'd say more than half the time he's pretty dead. Number 8. Serpent. Kull Borson is likely a villain who would be less well known by classic comics fans who have since fallen off reading, or just anyone who might not be as up to date on their modern comics or, only started reading modern comics in recent years. Kull Borson made his first appearance in part of the Fear Itself event, appearing in issue number 1. He was introduced as the god of fear, Odin's brother, who was the rightful ruler of the 9 realms, at least initially, the All-Father prior to Odin. However, due to the fact that he did not keep his word when it came to listening to his brother's counsel once he became All-Father, and also chose to rule with fear, he ended up being usurped. Odin could not bring himself to kill his brother and so decided to seal him away deep beneath the ocean. Typical Odin move in my opinion. The reason we never saw Kull until 2011 in the comics was because of his origins, with him being imprisoned for eons. He only emerged during Fear Itself, but was of course defeated and later was killed again during War of the Realms. He's definitely spent more time dead than alive in regards to Thor's overall narrative in the comics. Number 7. All Black. While Gorr is likely well known now thanks to his appearance in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU, the All Black has yet to be introduced to us yet. Nor its creator, Null. These two characters might be more elusive to fans who have not dived deep into the well of comics. The All Black is basically like Venom, a symbiote, and in fact the first symbiote ever created by Null, the god of symbiotes. The All Black Necrosword ended up being retrieved a long time ago by Gorr, the God Butcher. Well, Gorr and then he became the God Butcher, who used the All Black as an instrument of vengeance, possibly even becoming corrupted by its dark influence somewhat, because that's kind of a thing it does. He used the sword to defeat the gods in an effort to rid the universe of gods entirely, which is how the All Black became the enemy of Thor. Eventually, the All Black bonded fully with Gorr, allowing him to resurrect even after he was killed. Both the All Black and Gorr would be defeated by a team of Thors, but the symbiotic sword would later return in the future when King Thor was also faced with fighting Galactus. Thor would actually use the All Black in the fight, joining with it, and it would use him to get to Galactus, who the All Black would later bond with, turning Galactus from the Devourer of Worlds into the Butcher of Worlds.
Number 6. Silver Banshee. Siobhan McDougal comes from an old Irish family whose firstborn members are cursed with the powers of these Silver Banshees. When her father passed away and she was next in line, her uncle and brother opposed her, not wanting a woman to lead the clan, which kinda sucks. While performing the ritual without her uncle's consent, her brother interrupted it, causing her to be sent to the Netherverse for centuries. Eventually, the crone brought her back and bestowed the powers of the Silver Banshee on her so that she could exact her revenge. Now, she first appeared in Metropolis when Superman was a confident little tyke in 1987, and she actually nearly took him down permanently with her voice-based abilities, which a lot of people on this list can't say for themselves. One of her best moves was that if she knew someone's name, she could actually take their life in one fell mouth movement, which she used against Superman after learning his true Kryptonian name, although it just heavily stunned him. Again, he's one tough son of a gun. Number 5. Hobby Robber. If I ever become a villain, I really hope I have an extremely specific MO like Hobby Robber. Now, in case you didn't connect the dots, Hobby Robber, Lucius Spruce, has a thing for stealing people's hobby-related items, which is honestly so underrated in terms of how absolutely annoying that would be. Like, could you imagine being a painter or someone who makes model airplanes or something like that, and he just keeps stealing your paintbrushes or like your tools? It would drive me up the wall. For Superman, the Hobby Robber decided to set himself to stealing from Clark Kent's clock collection. You didn't know Clark Kent had a clock collection? Well, you're not alone, because I think he has only ever had it the one time Hobby Robber appeared back in Action Comics number 73 in 1944. Number 4. The Dummy. While the villain known as the Dummy was technically a vigilante villain, he has gone up against the Man of Steel himself, although extremely unsuccessfully, which shouldn't be surprising as the Dummy is either a very small man or a wooden ventriloquist dummy brought to life, who wields a walking stick that can fire a force beam and is really smart, which I feel like is untrue given the fact that he has tried to take on the Man of Steel while being 3'1". But hey, he had the courage to try his best, which is still something, so I can, The Dummy first appeared in Leading Comics number 1 in December 1941, and the best thing about this character is the fact that we actually don't know if he is or isn't an actual ventriloquist dummy. Number 3. Titano. Maybe it's just me, but I noticed a lot of villains from DC Comics happen to be apes. I read a lot of comics, it's kind of part of this job, but I have never fully understood why DC specifically has a majority of ape-based supervillains. Titano, though, is one of the more interesting ones. As a chimpanzee in a space program, he got bombarded with cosmic radiation that made him grow to an absolutely ridiculous size, go rampaging in Metropolis, and for some reason, he can now shoot beams of green kryptonite radiation out of his eyes. It's a perfect ability to use against Superman, which is crazy how that works, I don't know. The kicker for me, though, is how Superman defeats Titano by throwing him back in time to let the dinosaurs just deal with this massive ape. Number 2. Mr. Z, or Mr. Z, whichever you prefer. Now, I'd be lying if I said the concept for Mr. Z wasn't at least somewhat cool. His whole shtick is being immortal and traveling through time to trap famous people throughout history in a crystal that sits on top of his walking cane. Now, Superman, being one of the most popular and important heroes, obviously meant there was going to be at least an attempt to get inside that crystal. Unfortunately for Mr. Z, Superman's Kryptonian heritage just means that he is invulnerable to the crystal. Not only invulnerable to it, but he can overload the crystal, destroying it and releasing all those trapped inside. Jeez, I wonder why DC started struggling to make Superman's stories interesting. I don't know, maybe it's because he can just do whatever he wants. As for Mr. Z, he would face Superman twice more, once back in 1943 and again when the pair got stranded on an island and Superman got rescued, but Mr. Z was literally just left there to starve. How heroic, Superman, how heroic. And in at number 1 is Blue Matt. Here's how obscure Blue Matt is. On both of the wikis I checked out for this character, there was basically zero information. Matt appeared only in World's Finest Superman and Batman number 312 and 313 in 1985 as a member of the villainous group known as The Network. They arrive on the scene and instantly start explaining their powers while they start attacking people, which is an interesting way to go about it, but there you go. Other members can control sound waves, electrocute people, disintegrate people, all that fun villain stuff, but Blue Matt, he goes invisible, and he can turn other things invisible, like when he turned a wall invisible that Batman just runs right into when he's trying to attack Blue Matt. Blue Matt also seems to be the most shy one in the group, as he keeps umming and ahhing whenever he talks, which is honestly kind of adorable. I can't lie.
Number 10, Unus the Untouchable. Unus the Untouchable, what a wild character. An oldie and a goodie. Unus actually first appeared back in the original X-Men run, making his first appearance back in X-Men issue number 8, which after hundreds of X-Men issues is pretty old at this point. Unus himself is what he sounds like. His mutant powers allow him to become untouchable when he wishes, shielding him completely when activated. This psionic repulsion shield that he can create can be as thick or thin as he wants. Unus, whose current civilian name is Gunther Bane, has also been shown to be capable of reaching through the shield himself if needed, without dropping it entirely. Pretty powerful. It's not so powerful if someone comes and tries to make the shield something you have to deal with all the time, which is how they defeated him the first time though. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we are doing here, if you love obscure X-Men villains like me, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Number 9, Nemesis. This character rose to notoriety under a different name and is commonly referred to and known by that codename, but we can't say it here on YouTube, so instead we're gonna go with this other name, Nemesis, which is also a very AOA name, so yeah. Nemesis is known in the Age of Apocalypse reality for being the son of Apocalypse. At least, the alleged son of Apocalypse. I think we pretty much know at this point. We also don't know who his mother is though, so that's still a mystery. But it probably wasn't the woman we now know as Apocalypse's wife in the main continuity, thanks to modern X-Men books, Genesis. Which is also kind of a confusing name for her to have in regards to Apocalypse's and X-Men history, but anyways. Nemesis, being an ally and horseman of Apocalypse, ends up being a major antagonist and problem for the X-Men in this universe, who are led by Magneto, as Professor X is dead in AOA, which is kinda, you know, what helped bring about this whole dread alternate reality of Earth 295, aka Age of Apocalypse. Number 8, Dark Riders. Oh boy, the Dark Riders. What a weird group. No wonder we haven't seen them that much. The Dark Riders are believed to be Inhumans who for some reason allied themselves with Apocalypse, seemingly believing in his vision of a mutant-dominated world and his ideology of survival of the fittest. I don't know how Apocalypse convinced them that this was a good idea, but they do seem to be pretty into it, I'd say, so I gotta assume that he was just like really persuasive and didn't just straight up threaten them. But still, it's a whole weird thing. The Dark Riders, they're weird. The original roster included team members Foxbat, Gauntlet, Tusk, Hard Drive, Synapse, and Barrage. I mean, I feel like that also just says it all. Listen to those names. The Dark Riders. Number 7, Cassandra Nova. I love Cassandra Nova. With every issue of Marauders I am reading, I fall more in love with this strange and terrifying character. Cassandra Nova is basically Charles Xavier's evil twin, but she's also not a straight up evil twin. She is what the Shi'ar would actually call a Mumadrai. The Shi'ar believe that Mumadrai are basically evil twin spirits of newborns who must be defeated before said person can be born. So the idea with that is that like basically we all before we were born fought an evil version of ourselves. They serve to represent the exact opposite of everything that we are. So in the case of Xavier, who is often presented as being a pretty good guy, though you know, not always, Cassandra is pretty evil in comparison. While Xavier did successfully defeat her before he came into the world with his telepathic mutant powers manifesting while he was in the womb, because of his own psionic potential, Cassandra herself was powerful enough to survive this and eventually would return years later to fight against Xavier and his beloved mutants. Although, in being Charles's twin, she herself is also basically a mutant, so yeah. She's a mutant, but she's also Mumadrai. Number 6, Curse. Curse is Algrim the Strong. He was one of the Dark Elves who served Malekith, but was later betrayed by him. Due to the extent of his injuries, however, Curse cannot quite remember exactly what had really happened to leave him in such a fatal state, leaving him to believe that Thor was fully to blame, with Thor being the only person who he could remember was really involved at all. Curse's hatred for Thor was so powerful that the Beyonder sensed it and paid Curse a visit. deciding to grant him immense strength in addition to healing him. As such, Algrim became even stronger than ever and adopted the mantle of Curse, setting out to hunt down Thor. However, Curse would later remember the truth of Malekith's involvement in his initial demise and would later turn on him instead. Because yeah, Malekith kinda messed him up there. Number 5. The Midgard Serpent. While Jormungand is known for being an iconic Thor villain in terms of mythos, the Serpent does not appear that much. In fact, Kolborsson's Serpent, Thor's uncle, is probably more well known as a villain, and even he only really showed up a few years ago in the comics, first appearing just over a decade ago in 2011 in Fear itself. Oddly enough, although not his uncle, Jormungand is another serpent who also happens to be related to Thor as well, being rumored to be his nephew, the son of Loki and Angrboda, both frost giants. Because Jormungand was believed to be a future threat to the gods of Asgard, he was banished, sent to the depths of the ocean on Earth, becoming known as the Midgard Serpent, with Midgard being the name that Asgard uses for the realm of Earth. And you know, that's apparently where serpents go. Number 4. Curse. There is not only one curse, but actually two in the comics. For a time, Lady Waziria took over as the new curse. Initially, she was a dark elf who, after being betrayed by Malekith herself, became his enemy, seeking revenge against him. As such, she joined up with the League of Realms, heroes from the 9 realms who had banded together to hunt down and apprehend Malekith. There's the 10 realms now, but it might have been the 9 realms only at that time. Later, Malekith would actually capture Waziria and force her to become the new curse, taking Algrim's place. However, she was only cursed for a few years, from 2017 to 2019 in the comics, so some might not remember this, and considering how Curse is pretty much fully covered, some may have not even known that this version of the villain was Lady Waziria herself, because you know, we don't really see much of her face or anything. Number 3. Those who sit above in shadow. To really understand the cycle of death and rebirth and why it happens is to know those who sit above in shadow. At least the cycle of death and rebirth as it applies to the Asgardians and the Norse gods. And also you have to be pretty deep in the Thor mythos to know of those controlling villains. They are beings who apparently orchestrate the death and rebirth of the gods, feeding off the energy of mass destruction and world-devastating events like Ragnarok. Thor himself was actually a part of Odin's plan to defeat those who sit above in shadow, which was shown to have succeeded, but then later was revealed to have not completely worked. Or to have completely worked, but then those who sit above in shadow, I guess, simply returned afterwards. You know how it is. Number 2. Sindri the Merciless. Sindri the Merciless only made a few appearances in the comics, less than a handful I believe. Sindri was initially one of the members of All-Father Odin's council. However, after Odin learned that Thor had revealed his true identity to Jane Foster, he decided to take away Thor's power as a punishment. Y'all know Odin, for years, was not a fan of Jane Foster. He definitely did not ship Thor and Jane together. But Odin could not bring himself to take Thor's power, and so had Sindri do it for him. However, Sindri became ambitious as a result of the newfound power coursing through his veins. Rather than pass it on to Odin, as he was, you know, supposed to do, he instead became an adversary of both Odin and Thor by attempting to usurp Odin, take over Asgard, and become the new Allfather instead. Number 1. Replicas. Replicas only appeared in one single issue, both making their debut in issue 141 of Thor, but also seeing their demise in the very same issue. I love a one-shot villain. Although I would say Replicas represented the real danger in this issue, Replicas was not alone when it came to their villainy. In fact, Replicas, also known as Replica Model X3, was actually an android created by the alien inventor Chutta. Chutta's secret mission was to prepare Earth for an invasion, and they created Replicas in the hopes of creating chaos on the planet's surface. The mob boss, Slugger Sykes, what a name, hoped to use Replicas, going into business with Chutta in the hopes of acquiring his own personal army of androids. However, when Slugger learned of Chutta's true intent, it put the two villains behind Replicas at odds with one another, and instead they kind of turned on each other. You know, Slugger lives on Earth, so he was like, I'm an Earth person, and I think you wanting to mess us up. Not so cool, Chutta. Even for me, a mob boss.
Is Rogglzar. Rogglzar? I don't know. To call this freaky alien dude a heavy hitter is a vast understatement. He's this intergalactic mercenary who's not here to play games. What sets him apart is his intense hatred for Kryptonians. He's got this burning grudge against them, and he won't stop until he wipes out everything related to Krypton, which is already pretty harsh. I mean, their whole planet was blown to smithereens, but that wasn't enough for this guy. And so, He's dedicated his life to traversing the cosmos, hunting down the few Kryptonians who've managed to survive. So picture this, when he first showed up, he took on Superman and Supergirl at the same time, and they had to pull out all the stops, not even beating him with their powers, but instead relying on this gadget called the Phantom Zone Projector, just to get the upper hand. And let me tell you, it was not an easy feat to get this guy down. But here's where it gets even crazier. After that, he breaks out with a whole bunch of criminals and jumps back into action, attacking Superman, Supergirl, and General Zod, and even John Kent all at once. Now, folks, you'd be pretty stupid not to put him in your top villain list. But you gotta admit, taking on these big name heroes all at the same time, some seriously impressive stuff, and it's something that doesn't get enough credit. At number 9, Chari Badiz. I don't know. This dude, he's one of those DC villains who doesn't hog the spotlight, probably on account of his horrible name. Now, in Aquaman's World of Foes, where Black Manta and Ocean Master usually steal the show, this dude enters the scene and is a real troublemaker. What's cool, or should I say twistedly impressive, is his partnership with Silica. These two were like a villainous power couple causing mayhem, but things got seriously out of hand when this dude went full rogue. After Scylla kicked the bucket, he went all in on Aquaman. I mean, he actually went as far as stealing a superhero's powers. He did just that, swiping Aquaman's mojo and using it to make piranhas munch on the hero's hand. But then the plot thickens. After Aquaman's retaliation splash, this dude tried to command the fish again, and it ended up blowing up in his face. Instead of controlling them, he sort of fussed those little fishies, becoming this piranha-man hybrid, which sounds pretty cool. Now, he gained underwater skills and beefed up muscles, but compared to his hand-eating shenanigans, it was going from a blockbuster to a B-movie, let's just put it that way. If you're enjoying this video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is Prometheus. Prometheus had a rough start in life, to say the least. His parents were crooks, and they met their end at the hands of the cops. So he ended up inheriting all their shady stuff and took on a path completely opposite to justice. What sets Prometheus apart is his brain power. He's like a dark reflection of Batman. This guy, without any superpowers, goes toe-to-toe against the entire Justice League. He's got these plans, like a villainous playbook on how to take down each member of the Justice League, and he actually almost pulled it off. Yeah, he single-handedly took down the big guns of the JLA, one hero at a time. The craziest part was how he hacked into their super secret Watchtower computers, which nearly led to the defeat of the most powerful superhero team on Earth, which takes some serious smarts and guts. And this was just his very first strike against the Justice League, so that's seriously a wake-up call for anybody who underestimated this cunning evil genius. At number 7 is Extant, I think. Alright, picture this bad guy as a sort of behind-the-scenes baddie pulling the strings and causing chaos. He started off as Monarch, which is already a big deal in the villain world, but then he teamed up with Parallax, got himself some time-traveling powers, and decided to tinker with the multiverse. Pretty intense. Now, when Extant clashed with the Justice Society of America, it was like watching a showdown between a bulldozer and a sandcastle. He didn't just defeat them, he practically wiped the floor with these seasoned heroes. Some he aged up, while others he straight out just knocked them out. But the Justice Society of America didn't back down. They regrouped, got their act together, and eventually took Extant down. However, this initial attack was a real showstopper. It's like he made an entrance nobody could forget, a real shock to the superhero community. He might not always come out on top, but his impact is seriously unforgettable.
Number 6, Nimrod. If we're talking about the new Nimrod, he is well known thanks to the current era, but even he is still somewhat obscure as an X-Men villain, considering that, he hasn't been around for too long and only appears in a few issues at this point. However, even going back and talking about the more famous Nimrod from the Days of Future Past reality, for those who are not familiar, this could actually still be a version of the character who is considered obscure. The main Days of Future Past reality is often considered to be Earth 811, which is where Nimrod hails from. Here, and even in the current main timeline of Earth 616, Nimrod is considered to be a super sentinel, a super advanced mutant killing and detecting machine. So if you thought the Sentinels were bad, woo! Wait till you meet Nimrod. He's crazy, even though his name is kinda dumb. That's why I love him though. Number 5. Harold Leland. Despite having recently returned, Harold is usually someone often left out when it comes to his involvement with the previous villainous group known as the Hellfire Club. Or well, you know, he's kind of more, he's like on the side. Like Harry's there, but maybe in the back. Well, really, the Hellfire Club has become two different entities at this point now as well, with one remaining pretty villainous and the other being a somewhat altruistic Krakoan-based business known as the Hellfire Trading Club. Prior to Harry's resurrection on Krakoa though, he was a pretty bad guy and member of the Hellfire Club, back when it was made up of villains, before it was, you know, just about business and mutants and all that stuff. Throughout many of his Hellfire days, Leland was often seen as the right-hand man to more well-known mutant villain Black King of the Hellfire Club, Sebastian Shaw. And those were also back in the days when the Hellfire Club just wanted to like rule the world. Although who knows, maybe the trading company does want to rule the world. That would be an interesting twist. Number 4. Charles Xavier II, or Charles Xavier II. Charles Xavier II is the child of Mystique and Professor X. Wait. What? Yep, at one point these two had a child together, and in the main continuity too. That happened. Well, we don't really know fully what happened to this child in the main continuity, who I feel like we kinda just forgot about, who Mystique also gave up for adoption, surprise surprise. We do know of an alternate version of the character who actually gets a bit of a story in the reality of Earth 13729, where he joins up with his half-brother Reyes and basically becomes a villain. So that's the version we're focusing on for this point. Charles Xavier II accidentally kills his adoptive mother when his powers emerge, causing him to seek out his birth mother, Mystique. However, she is no longer around because she has been killed at this point by his half-brother, Reyes. Charles II then decides to create his own team of X-Men, believing that the current team has disgraced his father's name, who is also dead at this point. However, he's not a very good guy at all, and instead of inspiring a team of mutants to, you know, be better, he just uses mind control to get them to join him, giving them just enough awareness and control to kind of realize what's happening to them, but not enough that they can actually do anything about it. Yikes, that's really evil, man. That's really evil. Like, he could have just mind controlled them and been like, then you just won't be aware. But no, he was like, I want you to know what's happening. Number 3, Horticulture. Horticulture are such an awesome group of villain ladies. I really hope they do continue to appear for years to come and become super mainstream and not obscure. Like, I want to see them in the MCU. They deserve a live-action adaptation despite being pretty new. They made their first appearance in the 2019 X-Men series in issue number 3 and are a group of villainous women who plan to take over the world by controlling seeds and crops. In essence, they hope to drastically diminish the human population of Earth to return the world to a more natural state, thereby deciding through controlling seeds and crops as botanical scientists who will live and who will die. Number 2, Lucifer. Lucifer is another super old school villain who you may have forgotten about, or you never knew about to begin with perhaps. But you know who didn't forget? I didn't forget. I did not forget back when Professor X weirdly implied that Lucifer, as in maybe the devil at the time that he was bringing it up, was the one behind him losing the ability to walk. That happened at one point, and I was like, what is happening here? Now, Lucifer is not actually Satan though. He's not that Lucifer. He's actually an alien from outer space. I don't think it makes it better. Lucifer is a Quist from the planet Quistelium. He originally came to Earth to conquer it, but was foiled by Xavier, so he basically dropped a big rock on him. I'm not joking, that's pretty much what happened. Although initially implied to maybe be the devil, we later learn he is just a super advanced and intelligent alien dude. Though not too intelligent, because you know, the X-Men do defeat him. Number 1, Cordyceps Jones. Cordyceps Jones is one of the newest villains to pester the X-Men. He actively fought against the most recently retired roster in the current run, before Forge, Firestar, Iceman, Magic, and Havoc joined the team. Cordyceps Jones, however, only recently went up against the X-Men, having targeted Earth by putting a bounty on it after encouraging people to gamble on its destruction at one of his massive cosmic casinos, Game World. Prior to that, he made his first appearance in the 2017 Rocket series in issue number 4, which is also why Rocket was the one to help the X-Men with finding Game World and infiltrating it. Thankfully, they had a direct link to him through a team member at the time, Rogue, whose husband Gambit is a fellow friend of Rocket's through their shared love of gambling. We also learned in their pursuit of Game World and Cordyceps Jones that Gambit's secret nickname for Rocket is Small Blind. Cordyceps Jones might be newer in the comics, having appeared in less than 10 issues at the time of this recording, but he's actually an ancient threat, being over 30,000 years old and also being a giant parasitic fungal spore. He and obscure Wolverine villain Spore actually could probably do some crazy damage should they ever team up. That would be pretty wild. If you're watching this and you're from Marvel, make that happen. That sounds like a cool team up actually. And now we know Spore is maybe a